Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 22 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, this episode of Camera Position is a little bit different from previous episodes, primarily because it's substantially longer. Most Camera Position episodes, those of you who've been listening in since I've been going here, weigh in maybe 10 minutes or so, and this one's a little over an hour long. And the reason for that is that I recently was invited by the MacSpecialist reseller. It's a Macintosh computer store in Villa Park, Illinois, and I've got a link to their website on the cameraposition.com blog. They had invited me to speak at a seminar that they were having about a wide variety of topics, and my gig on this at this seminar was to talk about the creative process. And I was talking to a group of people who were designers, illustrators, and photographers, and I thought that it would be a useful thing for Camera Position listeners might enjoy listening to this extended Camera Position on the ideas behind the creative process. The topic or the presentation was entitled "Getting Back Your Box of Crayons," sort of the idea of being able to enjoy that playful aspect of creativity. So the MacSpecialist folks, I asked them for permission to record my session, and they said, please go right ahead, and I thanked them very much for that. And so this particular podcast, a little bit longer than your standard Camera Position podcast, but hopefully you'll find something of value in it. Let me know if you like this idea of class sessions as a podcast, and we'll see what we can do. And if you do like this, you may be interested in my History of Photography podcast, and you'll find a link to that on the cameraposition.com blog. So here we are joining the presentation, Getting Back Your Box of Crayons, at the MacSpecialist store in Villa Park, Illinois.
Talk about not losing your creative spark.
I think that's it anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for lights are off. Yeah, nobody needs to see me. Plus, I got cool graphics.
Okay.
At least I think. Thanks for having me, MacSpecialist folks. I'm greatly appreciative of the invitation to come here. And it's interesting, because I've been here at MacSpecialist for a bunch of seminars and technological kinds of things. And in fact, it's sort of interesting. I've sort of an interesting story to start with to kind of illustrate maybe in some way the way in which MacSpecialist kind of looks at the holistic idea of training. I was here some time ago, and I was walking in from the parking lot, and they were doing like a construction thing out in the parking lot, and there was some wet cement out there. And I saw Dustin walking across the parking lot, and a customer was walking toward the store and fell into this giant pile of wet cement. And Dustin, helped him out of the wet cement and brought him over, and dried him off, and gave him an apple jacket kind of a thing to all this other kind of stuff. And I said to him later, I said, Dustin, that is just so cool the way you were really solicitous of your customer. And he said, here at MacSpecialist, we deal with customers in the abstract and in the concrete. So that's sort of my function here today, is to talk a little bit about some of the abstract ideas. All the technology in the world can't do you any good if you don't have ideas. And really, and the previous speaker gave a sort of hand pull of who all we are. We're photographers, we're designers, we're illustrators, layout specialists, web designers, print designers. Is there a difference anymore? Probably not. And how do we come up with these notions of how do we do that job? And in many ways, the things that I'm going to speak to are about creativity on a sort of personal level, the sorts of things that you might do to be creative on your own. But I also want to sort of look at this as the idea of being creative in an environment where you're working with other creative people, or, and I know this has never happened to any of you because it never happened to me, when you're working with a client who thinks that they have a sense of what being creative is, but really doesn't quite have that together. Anybody have that happen? And the whole idea of trying to explain the creative process to a client and explain what that process is like. So that's what I'm up to. So I'm here to provide you with some scissors and white paste. I don't know, can you guys see this from back there? I made this. I didn't know how big their projector was, so I made this 800 by 600. But we'll see if it works. So here's a sort of little outline of what we're going to get at this afternoon. Try and define creativity a little bit, see if we can come up with some definition of what creativity might be. And look at how creativity works, how we creative people function, and how we're best able to function as creative people. How can we nurture creativity? How is it that we are able to kind of encourage creative ideas that we might have, and then stimulate new ideas? How do we stimulate new ideas, and more importantly, how do we stimulate new ideas when we're sort of mired in a rut, when we're stuck for something that's new or fresh, a new idea? And then how do we get our collaborators to understand? How do we get people who are along with us for this ride on the creative bicycle to kind of come along and be creative with us and accept our own creativity, accept what it is that we are doing when we're creative? So here's a question. What is that?
It's an opening to the other side.
It's an opening to the other side. A switch plate?
It's Ringo's hole in his pocket from the Yellow Submarine.
The hole in the pocket from the Yellow Submarine. That's a pretty good answer. Say again? Half of snake eyes.
Something different to everybody.
Something different to everybody. An interesting thing is that when I show this little circle, you draw it on the board or you draw it on the ground, and you show it to a group of little kids, like little kids, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and I have bigger kids now, but when I do this with them when they were littler, they'd say things like, and these are actual answers that I've gotten from little kids: a telephone pole as it's seen by a bird. Okay? The sun's evil sister. Honest to God, an actual answer that I got. The sun's evil sister. I thought that was a hell of an answer. The sun's evil sister. What's another one I got? An empty manhole. Sort of that whole idea of, the door to the other side. I kind of like that. So why is it that kids can come up with something like the black circle is the sun's evil sister, and it's harder for us to kind of come to that idea that this could be anything that you want it to be? But the problem is that it's anything that you want it to be, but we didn't come up with the sun's evil sister or a telephone pole as seen by a bird flying over. The kids did. Say again?
We haven't ruined them yet.
We haven't ruined them yet. And really, the whole deal here is that we're given a box of crayons in kindergarten. Everybody gets one, and everybody learns that it's okay to make marks, and that every mark is beautiful because your parents are always going to put it up on the refrigerator, right? And the idea that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay if the picture of mommy doesn't look like mommy. It's okay if the picture of the house doesn't look like the house. It's okay if anything is anything it wants to be. But slowly over time, especially when kids hit, puberty, it seems, they trade in the crayon box for algebra books, and suddenly we now have to have a set of right answers. We have to have a set of answers that are yes or no, this is correct or this is incorrect. And one of the things that I've seen just really in the time that I've had kids, I have a 14 and an 11-year-old, that educational systems are beginning to place more of an emphasis on visual literacy and beginning to place more of an emphasis on the sort of ambiguity that exists in our world. But by and large, everybody in this room, especially as I kind of look out and see that we're all somewhere in the realm of approximately the same age, right? We all kind of came from a scholastic system that at some point said, "Give me your crayons, here's your algebra book. Start memorizing the right answers." And the problem is that we need to get back to this whole idea of being children. And here's this great quotation from Pablo Picasso. "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up." And really, that's our problem. And our problem, and I'm speaking often, I will speak often this afternoon in platitudes, but our problem really is that not only are we no longer children, so it's harder for us to think like that, but we're working with a bunch of grown-ups who are paying real grown-up money to do real grown-up things, and you know, in our own personal creative lives, we're paying our own money to do our own creative things, and you know, we have to balance out that equation. But let me talk in platitudes for a little bit, because I think it'll make a little bit more sense. And again, I made these a little bit small, I guess, maybe for those guys in the back row there. But this is a photograph by Jacques-Henri Lartigue, a great photographer from France, who made almost all of his best photographs when he was a young teenager. Started photographing at about age 9 or 10, and made photographs all the way through his 17th year. And this is one that was made probably when he was like 14 or 15. A pretty remarkable photograph. Lots of things going on. Lots of kind of incongruities and sort of bits and pieces of interesting things going on in the picture. Partly because he hadn't really yet learned that it wasn't okay to take a picture like that. So one of the problems we have, I think, about creativity is that what we get is myths. Myths about what creativity is or isn't. And I can't tell you how many times, as my introduction said, I've been in the education world for a long time, and have talked about creativity for a long time, and I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, "I'm just not creative. I'm just not the creative sort. I'm not." You know, creativity is stupid. I know I've heard that. I've heard that from clients. You know, it's stupid to be creative. I just need a brochure. You know, creativity is stupid. It's just fluff. It's just ideas. I don't need that. I'm not that sort of person. I'm not creative. I've heard that probably 10,000 times in the years that I've been an educator, which is always very interesting in that, you know, I teach photography. You would think that people who are coming to a photo class have this inner desire to express their own creative selves, and yet they say, "Well, I'm really not very creative, but I really like making photographs, and I especially like it when I get up early and it's dawn and the light is really soft." And wait a minute, you are creative. Look, you have to point them at it. But I'm not clever enough. Creativity is difficult. I've always loved this Louis Pearson photograph of the Countess there looking through a little frame. So I think all of those myths about creativity are really excuses. They're really ways for us to sort of dodge the creative impulse and to kind of get around the idea that what we really want to be and what we really are ultimately is creative folk. We're creative folk, and the idea of sort of saying, "Well, I'm not creative. I'm just not feeling very creative today." We're all born with it. Creativity is a birthright. It's something that comes as part of being human. And it's something that everybody has. And all we have to do, I think, is kind of cultivate the idea of creativity in some way. So I wanted to try and define creativity for us and see if we could come up with some sort of a definition here. The ability to create new, original things and experiences and ideas by grasping and nurturing inspiration, remembering past experiences and ideas, forgetting past experiences and ideas, destroying past experiences and ideas, synthesizing past experiences and ideas. And you'll note that there is an awful lot of ambiguity there.
And one of the problems with creativity, I think, and one of those sort of fear factor things from the previous slide, is that people, when they confront this ambiguity with creativity, are unprepared for it. We're not kind of ready to deal with that idea of, well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Maybe the thing that I had that was great before needs to be dismantled systematically. Maybe the thing that I had that was great before needs to be put together with 3 or 4 other things that were great before. Maybe what we need to do is nurture inspiration. How do we nurture? I'll go out on a limb here and say the women in the audience, they're nurturers. We men, we're not. That whole idea, right? And the idea that nurturing is sort of this feminine, motherly thing, but I think that we all have to address the idea that we can nurture in both ways. One of my favorite contemporary photographers, a guy named Arno Raphael Minkinen, really interesting guy. So that whole idea of opposites, the whole idea of ambiguity, is a difficult notion to kind of wrap ourselves around. Creative people tend to have certain characteristics. Now, I say that in full knowledge that a few minutes ago I said everybody's creative, and everybody has the creative bent, and everybody has their own sense of creativity. What I'm talking about here is that people who live creative lives and live them in a consistent way tend to have these characteristics that are in common. You'll probably recognize at least some of these things as things that you are. Mentally flexible, as opposed to, it's got to be this way. By golly. Creative people often, not always, but often have sort of a kind of lackadaisical attitude about organization, let's say. Like, depends on what your office looks like, right? But many creative people that I know have offices that kind of look like an explosion occurred. Critical. Creative people tend to be critical. And we tend, and I'm guessing that many of you have backgrounds that involve design or art study at some point in school. One of the things that's always been very interesting to me in teaching photography is how when I say the words, we're going to have a critique, students recoil because they're presuming that I'm going to say, well, this part sucks and that part's awful and you needed to focus this and that's too dark and that's too light and why'd you shoot that? But the whole idea of positively critiquing something is a part of what it is that we do. I like this. I think this functions well. So critically speaking, both in positive and negative terms. Persistence. Persistence is another hallmark of the creative person. Somebody who tends to keep moving on something regardless of how many times they bang their head on the wall. That impulse to want to throw the computer out the window, but not doing it. That's the key. Not throwing the computer out the window. So persistence and striving toward those goals, and bravery. Bravery. Real honest-to-goodness bravery. Not necessarily bravery to, go out into an environment where people might be shooting at you, but the idea to stick your neck out and try something new just because. And one of the things that I think creative people have as a sort of hallmark is the fact that when they speak their creative idea, they're willing to take an arrow for it. They're willing to say, this is what I think is going to be the best thing for you, the client, or me, the photographer or designer or whatever. So let's talk about the creative person's brain. And, wait a minute. Wrong graphic. I meant to take that out of there. I was playing with my kids on this. Anyway. The man with two brains. There was a research scientist named Sperry, an interesting guy. He won the Nobel Prize for research in neurological studies in 1981, but about 25 or 30 years before that, he had come up with this notion of two brains. Not necessarily two brains. I mean, don't get delusions of grandeur here. We only have one, but rather that our brain's function was split into two hemispheres, the left and right hemisphere, and that the left and right hemispheres of the brain tend to accomplish different sorts of things. And you've probably heard this idea, oh, I'm left brain or I'm right brain, and you never really can quite remember which. The idea here is that left brain is the stuff that is logical, sequential, rational. Our left brain analyzes things, it's objective, it deals with things in parts. Whereas the right brain tends to be much more random, much more intuitive. It tends to deal with things on a holistic level. It tends to synthesize things instead of analyzing them. And it tends to be subjective instead of being objective. And it tends to deal with big picture things, whole things, instead of small little parts of things. So the idea that one half of the brain controls the sort of creative functions, and another half of the brain controls these sort of rational thoughts. There is some overlap, say the neurological researchers. There is some overlap that suggests that some functions take place in both sides of the brain. Some functions take place more on one side, but also take place in smaller amounts on the other side of the brain. But we can fairly clearly see that the right side is our creative friend, and that the left side is kind of demonically plotting against our creative lives by trying to be rational and logical and thoughtful about things, whereas this side of the brain is really wanting to say, let's play. I want to play. This is, no, you've got to finish your peas. So the whole idea here of left brain and right brain, and so obviously our goal for creative thinking is to look at things that are right brain kinds of things. And the other part of this is that what we have to do is we have to kind of try and dim out the left brain ideas. We have to kind of try and turn them off, sort of like squinting or something, to kind of turn off those left brain notions, to kind of start to think through the idea of how we do what it is that we do as creative people. And when we do this, this is hard. It's especially hard for those of us who are working in a production environment. I'm going to expect to see some nods like this, right? Because the production environment says, here's the task, here's the deadline, here's when it has to be done, and by God, it better be good. Like that, right? But when we sort of put on this creative self and kind of maybe take this deep breath, it doesn't have to necessarily be a long period of time. It doesn't have to be a day of, well, I'm thinking about the project. It has to be some place, though, where we can begin to just turn off all of that logical, rational stuff that says, oh my God, how am I ever going to get all these things done by Friday? It's not going to happen. I know I'm going to fail. We have to put that part away. We have to take that part and kind of just shove it over to the side, even if it's only for 10 minutes, to kind of let ourselves deal with the random, intuitive, holistic synthesis ideas that are happening. And the trick is to kind of teach yourself to shut down that side of the brain. I'm trying to remember the name of the movie. I'm sure somebody's going to come up with a baseball movie where it's about an aging pitcher, and he love of the game. Yeah, he has to kind of, and he stands up on the mound and he sort of shuts down his mind, and suddenly the entire stadium goes quiet, and all he hears is the tap of the ball in his mitt. He's taken that whole idea of getting rid of the logical thing. Geez, I got to strike this guy out. I got to do it. No, he's just going to throw the ball. And that whole idea of being in that zone is really the sort of part of this. And if we teach ourselves to ignore those rules and the must-dos and the have-to-dos and especially the people sort of leaning over our shoulder saying, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? If we begin to kind of put that into the background, even just for a few minutes, ideas are going to begin to surface for us. And it might not happen right away. You might need to train your brain to be able to think this way and to shut things down. I hesitated before I put brainstorming up there because it's such an overused cliche, but it is in fact the best way to describe an activity that all of us have heard about before, probably have participated in before, and sometimes it's gone really well and sometimes it's not gone well, but it is one of the primary creative devices out there. And what it is a way of asking all of the what-if questions. All of the questions that have to do with what happens if this set of circumstances were to prevail. So in this brainstorming strategy, wild ideas, crazy wild ideas, are welcomed. Volume is welcomed. The more ideas you have, the better off you are. I think you've probably all seen this at work somewhere in your creative life. The more ideas you have, the better the chances are that one of them is going to be good. The more ideas you have, the better the chances are that you're going to have something that will bubble up out of that ferment and be something useful. Building onto or modifying just expressed ideas is encouraged. So if you've got an idea that just came out, and somebody says, oh, that's a great idea, and then the next piece is, well, let's take that and take it 3 steps further. That part is a big deal as well. And that idea of brainstorming works both in groups, but it also works individually. We're going to go through a couple of exercises here in a couple of minutes. If I hope I'll have some time to do these things. But the idea is that you have to dig deep. You have to continue to think through the process. And you really have to, that whole idea of wild ideas are welcomed. How do you keep a fish from smelling? Could be a what if. How do you keep a fish from smelling? Cook it right away, keep a cat around, cut off its nose. You have to keep working with all of the possibilities of what it is that answer, what if, could be answered by. So, and again, we'll work on some of these ideas. And this whole idea is something that I kind of call sideways thinking. And I don't mean sideways like the movie Sideways, where you just go and get drunk for 3 days and have random intimate encounters with anybody you meet, but whatever. But anyone can look for history in a museum.
Right brain or left brain?
You all saw the movie Sideways, right? I'm hoping that I didn't just sort of like go off on a random, Anyone can look for history in a museum. The creative explorer looks for history in a hardware store. Part of the deal here is that what this is suggesting is, this guy's a writer, critic guy, leader. But what this is suggesting is that when we look for stuff in the place that we expect to find it, we're going to find the stuff we expect to find. When we go and look for things elsewhere, we begin to find other kinds of ideas. So, and then this one is one of my favorites. She's Freud's granddaughter. Creative minds always have been known to survive any kind of bad training, which I just love. I just love that. So the other thing we have to do, though, in addition to brainstorming, in addition to letting ideas roam free, is to step away from the idea vehicle. We have to get back and take some time to examine those ideas, but examine them in a passive way. Breathing room is important. Let those ideas have some time to bubble and ferment and be away from the creative environment. And that's a hard part, especially for those of us like me, and I'm guessing like most of you who are really driven. You want to finish it. You want to finish it. You want to finish it. And you really have this desire to start it and then it's in the middle, and I'm almost done with it, and I know that if I stay up till 3:30, it'll be fine, and I'll finish it. No. It's hard to do, but you have to step back, take a break, relax, sleep, exercise, read. How many of you have great ideas come to you in oddball places? The shower. The shower is a great one where it's this sort of non-event, right? You got to do it, and you're getting clean, and the water's, and all of a sudden you say, well, geez, if I took that thing and put it over here with that, it would just be exactly the right thing. And what happens here is that we're using our subconscious minds. We're allowing our subconscious minds to kind of come to the fore and say, oh, there we go. Those are the ideas that I've been thinking about. That brainstorming activity really needs some resting space. It needs some place to kind of breathe and for you to get away from it. Because you've packed all of those ideas into your head. You have to wait until those ideas begin to come out, and the strongest ideas are going to be the ones that will come out. And it's really important to get away from that brainstorming idea. Nurturing creativity in your personal life is also important. You have to do things like mining your values. Who are you? What do you like? What don't you like? How do you know those things? It's a really interesting thing. If you sat down and made a list, and regularly update this list of the things in this list of questions. Who are you? What do you like? How do you know that you like those things? What do you want? What are your goals? It sounds dangerously like mission statement. Step away from that as fast as you can. But the idea is that unless you have some sense of who you are and what you want, you're not going to have a really good idea of where you want to go. So, mining your values. What is it that segregates you from every other creative person that's out there? What is your style or your bent or your interest? What are you especially good at? How do you know what you're good at? I got X number of clients that are like that. Or I got, I have 500 photographs that are of this sort of subject that are successful and are measured in their success on some sort of scale of being accepted into, juried shows or God only knows, you name it. Revisiting successes is another place to nurture your creativity. How many times in the last, let's say, year, have you gone back and looked at past projects and really kind of dissected them, laid them out on a table and spent some time looking at them? Very important to do. Very important to do because you tend to say, okay, here's my project, I finished it, now I'm going to put it over here. Client's happy, I got paid, boom, I'm done. But how do I go back and look at those successes and embrace them, find out what worked, find out if there's a springboard to something new in that project. Something that you used, some idea that you came up with, some strategy that you employed of how you approached the subject for a photograph, for example, that might be a springboard to other work. But in addition to embracing them, you need to learn to leave them behind. Get rid of the things that didn't work. Move on. And even the things that did work, say, okay, well that was great, I'm going to go elsewhere. And what's in the opposite direction? And I always love this photograph by Ouija, the great news photographer, who was renowned for turning the other direction and making a photograph of something that was on the other side of what the subject was. So this is a photograph of a murder scene, but he's looking at the crowd that's assembled as opposed to the dead body on the street. His name Ouija was because he was able to get to the scene of the crime before anybody else was, and so everybody said he must have a Ouija board. Here's another one, though, that revisits past successes in another direction. Try on another hat. What would somebody else have done with that same subject? In other words, if you had a project. I'm a photographer, let's say I had a project to photograph a church interior for the for the church. And if I tried on another hat of another photographer, if I kind of looked around and thought of other photographers who do architectural interiors and thought, well, how would somebody else, how would Bob Nick have done that architectural shoot? How would his approach have differed from the way my approach has been? How would he have done it differently? And can I incorporate any of those ideas? Can I, steal a little bit from Bob? I'm all for it. And then also in nurturing creativity, trying to think sideways always. And this is really the hard part. And some of you may already do a lot of this stuff. You may already be living this sort of creative life where you do a variety of things that are outside of the creative endeavor that you do on a daily basis. Trying new foods, traveling, listening to music of all sorts. It's important to listen to music of all sorts. I think it's especially important to listen to music that you find difficult or uncomfortable to listen to. Reading voraciously is very important. All kinds of things to read, not just one sort of genre of literature that you might read. Visiting museums and, as Leeson said, hardware stores. Go to the theater. Now, when's the last time you attended a theatrical performance where it was necessary that you suspended disbelief? You're sitting in a room with a bunch of other people, and it's different from a movie, right? You had to suspend disbelief in a different way. There are real people standing on the stage in front of you pretending to be other people entirely. It's quite an amazing creative enterprise. I think theater is an important part of the creative world. Change your sleep habits. I don't know about you, I do this on a semi-regular basis, I guess. I'll decide to go to bed really early for a couple of weeks so that I can get up really early so that I can be up at a different hour than I normally am. The light is different. The neighborhood outside my house is different. Everybody in the house is sleeping. It's a really interesting time for me. Simultaneously, I will also stay up somewhat later than I normally do and sleep a little bit later. There's, and depending on your work schedule, especially if you're, a self-employed type person, well, that's a really terrific advantage you have of being able to change your sleep habit. Change when you go to sleep, when you wake up, and being able to work at a different time of the day. Take a different way home from work. If you travel to your workplace, try a different route because you'll see something new. I tried a different way home not too long ago, and I saw this garden that I'd never seen before in this person's yard, and I thought it was really extraordinary. I stopped and got out of the car and looked around and ended up having a nice conversation with the lady and made this beautiful garden. Speaking of which, talk to strangers. Don't tell your mom I told you this, but talking to strangers is a really useful activity. Find out what makes them tick. One of the things that I find often that's very interesting is that when I talk to people about what it is, that they're doing, I can often extract little bits about what they might be interested in terms of what I'm doing. If I can subtly steer the conversation toward photography and what kind of photography they might like and so forth and so on, I can learn a little bit about how this person who I never would have met would view the kind of work that I might do or view photography in general. It's really sometimes difficult to get out of the skin that we're in of talking to only other creative people who are in the creative food chain and the client that we're being creative for if we're in that sort of business. So, all right. I have a couple of things that I want to hand out to you, and depending on how much time these things take, we'll see how much of this we get through. We're going to start off with this one. A whole new room with the lights on. Yeah, I was going to sort of cast these out in a different way, but I saw it spread out in the room. Press an exercise called hard and soft. And hopefully everybody's got a writing utensil. If you don't, let me know. I will write it up front. And what I want you to do is, the directions are fairly simple. A list of concepts by yourself. Don't solicit. Did I skip you guys? I didn't mean to. You don't get to play. Oh, a writing utensil. Here's the homework.
You don't have to write these down.
You can draw arrows if you want. You need a writing utensil as well. Here, you can get the custom. This is the chiropractor pen. But what I want you to do is segregate these things into hard and soft. I'll let you take a couple of minutes to do that. What's that? Yeah, you can either write them in the boxes or you can draw lines if you. Cool. As always, let me know when you're done. Everybody mostly done? Kind of mostly, almost, kind of, sort of, except for the 3 that I gave them too late? Your reward will be no penalty. I use that at home with the kids all the time. Your reward? No penalty. All right. If you're done, turn over to the other side of this. And up at the top there is the basic legend. There are 2 kinds of people in this world, those who divide everything into 2 groups and those who don't. So the idea here is to interpret what you've just done. So how would you compare the hard list with the soft one? Give me some descriptors. How you'd compare your list of hard with your list of soft. Left brain, right brain? Changeable, not changeable. Good answer.
Fun and it sucks.
Fun and it sucks.
Work and play.
Work and play. Work and play. That's an interesting answer. Work and play. So that the work stuff can't be play and the play stuff can't be work. That's I find that, just sort of mind that for a second and think about what that means. Work and play. When you look at the final list you came up with and see that the items on the hard side have a definite right and wrong answer, as the lady here in the second row said. On the hard side, things are black and white. On the soft side, there are many shades of gray. A few of you might say that you can pick up things on the hard side. A bar of metal, the soft things are a bit harder to grab onto, like a handful of water. It's harder to kind of quantify them and grasp them. Now, and this is where this starts to get, at least I think, Jeff thinks, Hope you do too. Interesting. Add the word thinking behind the words in both boxes. Diffuse thinking, precise thinking, and you may see some of these terms in a slightly different light. If you start to look at these terms, humorous thinking, consistent thinking, ambiguous thinking, play thinking, exact thinking, you might begin to see those ideas or those concepts in a different way. Soft thinking has many of the characteristics on the soft list. It's metaphorical, it's approximate, it's diffuse, it's humorous, it's playful, it's capable of dealing with contradiction. Hard thinking, on the other hand, tends to be more logical, precise, exact, specific, and consistent. We might say that hard thinking is like a spotlight, bright, clear, and intense, but the focus is narrow. Soft thinking is like a floodlight, more diffuse, not as intense, but it covers a more wide area. Soft thinking tries to find similarities and connections among things. Hard thinking focuses on their differences. For example, a soft thinking person, a typo there, might say that a cat and a refrigerator have a lot in common. They both have a place to put fish, they both have tails, they come in a variety of colors. The hard thinker would establish the cat and the refrigerator as being members of two different sets. So what does this have to do with being a creative photographer, insert designer, illustrator, etc.? To understand that, we have to look at the two main phases in the development of new ideas, the germinal phase and the practical phase. In the germinal phase, ideas are generated and manipulated. In the practical phase, they're evaluated and executed. We tend, by the way, professional people who do this for a living, tend to live in that phase of being non-germinal more often. We tend to be very much about the practical application of things. You know, if you look at what most of the content is that you've been here for, you know, some of you yesterday and today and perhaps tomorrow, I think there's content tomorrow, right? That most all of it has to do with, you know, learning the tool, you know, learning how to use that tool rather than doing with the tool. So we tend to live in this world where we've got the tool and we've got to use the tool, but the idea, to use a biological metaphor, the germinal phase sprouts the new ideas, the practical phase harvests them. And we have to learn how to plant ideas and get them to sprout first before we can harvest them. Both types of thinking play an important role in the creative process, but usually during different phases. Soft thinking very useful in the germinal phase, when you're hunting for new ideas, thinking about and manipulating problems. Hard thinking, on the other hand, is best used in the practical phase, when you're evaluating ideas, narrowing in on practical solutions, and preparing to carry an idea into action. The problem is that, as I mentioned earlier, our educational system is strong on teaching people all about the hard or practical side. 2 + 2 = 4, I before E except after C, etc., but not very good at teaching us how to be germinal. And we're not that adept at soft thinking, so it takes some practice to do it well. It also takes some practice to recognize when you're doing hard thinking, which is good and necessary, too much or at the wrong time. And oftentimes, when we go into a creative project, we may tend to think about the practical matters right up front, when really we need to be thinking about the impractical matters right up front. And I would suggest that this hard and soft list is a really neat way to deal with client conversations, or on a personal level to deal with, here's a project I'd like to get myself involved with. Here are all of the possible things that I can think of related to the project. How can I divide them up into these two different boxes so that I know which ones to attack first and which ones to attack second? How do I know which ones to do first and which ones to do second? If I just start to think about them in this way, just list every possible thing you could think of. You know, whether it's, you know, how many assistants you need to hire, to to what kind of equipment you're going to use, to what kind of light is going to be the best for the subject. If you're a photographer, you know, that's sort of my mindset of where I'm thinking. So now think about the way you decide on what you're going to photograph, what you're going to do about those things, and how you'll transform your photography into something new. Again, insert design, illustration, etc. in there. Think about how your thought process works and begin to use this idea. And you don't have to use, you know, these boxes, but, you know, if you just draw a line down the center of a piece of paper and start on a separate piece of paper, writing down all of the things you can think of that you need to have for a project. Physical things, emotional things, mental things, financial things, anything you can think of. And begin to write those down on a separate piece of paper and then divvy them up into hard and soft. Real important that you start out with a list that's unequivocated, though. You have to start out with the list as is. Everything you're going to need to do. And then begin to divide them up. And if you divide them up, you'll begin to see where you need to spend some time up front in terms of being creative and thinking creatively about what you're going to do, and then what's going to happen later. Because I'm not here to say that it's all about creative, touchy-feely stuff. I know that it's about delivering product, whether it's delivering it to yourself. Oops, sorry, bang the microphone there. Sorry, home viewers. But whether it's, it's not necessarily about just being touchy-feely. I know that you've got to deliver. I have to deliver, both in my job as an educator and my job as a photographer. I have to do that stuff. So that's hard and soft. See, I've got a couple of minutes left. I don't really know. They didn't give me a precise amount of time that I have to spend here this afternoon. But let me give you this other one real fast. I should give this to the three people I left out first, just because, This is another sort of exercise kind of deal that you can use either alone or in a group situation. I'm talking about these group things because I know that a lot of you work in work groups. Sorry, gang. I'm sure they showered and everything. He wants some good ideas. All right. So this one was what if, and what if is a way for us to be ridiculous in some cases. What would happen if gravity stopped for 1 second every day? What would the world be like? How would everything that is in this world be designed differently? What would land surfaces look like, but how would everything in this room be different? If all of a sudden, 1 second, gravity stopped and then it went back again, our lives would be completely different. Anybody ever visit third world countries? I went to India twice a number of years ago to help an Indian group set up a community college system. It's really very interesting, and one of the things that they were doing was one of the first things they wanted to do was pre-press, and none of the pre-press faculty at the College of DuPage wanted to go, and so I was the guy with the next most amount of knowledge, and I got 2 free trips to India out of the deal. It was great. But I went into this one amazingly great, installation with 3 big Heidelberg presses in it, and a Quantel paint box machine, and all these other things. And one of the rooms is about twice as long as this, and it had car batteries lined up from floor to ceiling, about twice as long as this, in 3 banks. So down that wall, and then another one, and another one. And guess what? The electricity went out 3 times a day, but randomly. So that's why they had all these car batteries, so that when they were in the middle of a press run, they could at least stop the press in a controlled fashion, or they could save. They didn't have a lot of time on the car batteries, but the grid wasn't powerful enough to support. This is in Bangalore. Things might have changed in Bangalore, as we know, a lot of stuff's moved over there recently. But it's fascinating to think about what if. What would your life be like if you knew that the electricity was going to go out at least twice or 3 times a day, every day? How would you change the way you work? So, and it was something that made me think, geez, everything I do would be different. You'd back up a lot more. That's for sure. That's for sure. They were Mac users too. That's cool. You know how here when you meet another Mac user, especially somebody who's not from your creative circle, it's sort of like a high five kind of a thing. In India, it was like, because everybody's in the Microsoft Windows world there. So if you met another Mac user, it was like some sort of spiritual bond. It was very cool. The idea of being able to be flexible is what this is about. We have the ability as humans to symbolize our experience. Our thinking is not limited to the real and the present. This capability empowers us in some major ways. First, it allows us to anticipate the future. What would happen to our picnic? What alternative arrangements would be need to be made if it rains tomorrow? By simulating such possibilities in our mind, we can plan for the future. So if soft thinking is the germinal stage of things, then the realm of the possible that is postulated above is the germinal seedbed. One of the best soft thinking tools for cultivating this seedbed is the what if tool. Asking what if is an easy way to get your imagination working. To do it, you simply ask what if and then finish the question with some contrary to fact condition, idea, or situation. The what if question can be whatever you wish as long as it's not a currently existing situation. The nice thing about what ifing is that it allows you to suspend a few rules and assumptions and to get into a germinal frame of mind. A few examples: what if human life expectancy were 200 years? What if when you looked in the mirror there became two of you? What if people didn't need to go to sleep? That's one that I've often wished for because, you remember Kai Krause. Kai Krause, a great software engineer guy. I used to go to seminars where he'd speak, and one of my favorite phrases he'd use is that there aren't enough months in the day, which I always loved. So the what-if exercise can be done solo or in a group, and I've given some instructions there for both solo and group situations. If your group is large, if you've got a big conference room full of folks, if you've ever been in this situation, and I have a number of times, it works a whole hell of a lot better if you break them up into groups of 3 or 4, because there tends to be a sort of stagnation of fear that occurs in a big group that isn't in existence in a small one. And when I do this in a class that's, say, this size, I break people up into groups of 3 or 4, and it works a whole lot better. Postulate any kind of what if. If you're working on a project that has some specific outcomes, think about what ifs that would be the opposite of those outcomes. What if we didn't make a brochure, and instead we spent that money on highway maintenance, or whatever. Who knows? But eventually you come around to germinating some really interesting ideas. I know that some of you have already turned this upside down. Several points to the exercise. Among them, the primary one is that we don't often use our germinal seedbed, our imagination tools, because we haven't been taught to, or at least we haven't been taught to in a really long time. Maybe a better way is to say that we haven't been taught not to, or we've been taught not to. Our schools and our parents start us off thinking about fairy tales and fantasies, but eventually we get led into a more practical way of thinking. And we really get sort of mired down in that whole idea of thinking in a practical, pragmatic fashion. Yes, sir?
There's an exercise like this on the Assistant Director's Training Program test that the DGA hands out, and it's a 6-hour test, and at hour 5, they give you a what-if statement, and they say, come up with as many solutions or what-ifs that you can. You have 30 seconds.
So they do it to you when your brain is all frazzled and stuff, sort of like fraternity hazing. Cool. That's very interesting. So, other comments or thoughts about that? So, and rather than go through the what if here, I see that I'm close to the hour that. I forgot to go to the next. The next thing here on the sleep. There we go. I love this photo by Sandro of John Malkovich. wearing a jacket that looks just like the background. I'm going to flip this off real quick just to finish this up, because I just have one more little blip that I wanted to give you. And again, I thought about some of these things relative to the work group, because I know, it's interesting. I teach photography at College DuPage. I get 1,000 students, over the last umpteen years coming in, and their imagination in their head is that a photographer is all by himself or herself doing what they do in this sort of vacuum. And I think they think of it as, the woods, and they've got a path through the woods, and they're tripping lightly through the woods, and that everything that they do will be beautiful, and then someone will buy it. And they don't really see that what it is, and we try to disabuse them of this early on and at repeated intervals later on, that it's this creative work group, and that you need to work within this environment of other creative people. So I know that one of the things that happens, and I think one of the best sort of pieces of fodder for my career as an educator was my previous career as a photographer, talking to clients about what it was that they wanted me to do. I want you to take these pictures of this thing, or these sets of things. I remember there was one client who had needed to make an advertising photograph of a whole bunch of little figurines that she sold. And what she wanted was, she wanted me to set them all up on an 8 by 4 foot table and make a photograph of them. And I said, well, how big is this going to be reproduced? And she said, it's going to be about 3 by 2 inches in a newspaper ad. Like, well, but trying to teach people about what it is that we do is an important part of what it is that we do as creative people. And so trying to teach the others, like in Lost, trying to teach the others outside of the circle, trying to teach the others what it is that we do and help them understand the creative process is, I think, a lot of what we do. So collaborative creativity, using those above exercises, but another alternative is a yes meeting. And I've used these, and it sounds ridiculous, and you'll encounter some resistance. Hell, you'll encounter some resistance in most of this stuff from a lot of people, but you have to just be, remember I said earlier, you're persistent as creatives, right? You have to just bulldog your way into it. You set up a meeting, set a topic for the group, and let the ideas flow, but every idea has to be met with an encouraging yes. Every idea. You can't let anybody say, no, that's a dumb idea, I don't want to do that. Every idea has to be a yes idea, and what eventually happens is that the fear of being ridiculed for an idea begins to disappear. It takes a while, especially if you've got suits in the room, but eventually that fear of being ridiculed drops away, and it encourages a climate that can consider ideas that are quote-unquote impossible, which, as we know, those things that people never thought they wanted in the first place often turn out to be the thing that not only did they want the most, but they also were happiest with because it solved their problem in the most interesting, attractive way. So there's that. And lastly, I don't know if can you guys see any of this stuff? My contact information, if you wanted to contact me, my email is fairly simple, jeff@jeffcurto.com. My website, my personal website is jeffcurto.com. If you were interested in stuff that we do in the photo department at COD, it's the standard COD website, which is cod.edu, and then a / and photo. And then I also do a podcast about the creative side of photography that I just started maybe 3 months ago or so. And I've been on a hiatus for about a month because I've been out of the country, but cameraposition.com. And if all goes according to Hoyle and Dustin said it was okay, I'm taping or recording this, and they're recording it on video as well, but I'll have this up as a podcast, and I'll also have these what if and hard and soft things up there as PDFs if you wanted to email them to anybody or any of that kind of stuff.
Well, hopefully there are at least a few of you who've made it through to the end of an hour of this episode of Camera Position, and thanks very much. And again, we'll be back to our regular Camera Position, talking about photographs and thinking about photographs. But feel free to give me an idea of whether this was something you liked, or just in general, whether Camera Position is something you like. Drop me a line at jeff@jeffcurto.com, or leave a comment at the cameraposition.com blog. Thanks for listening.